Welcome back to Beyond Survival, the ARDS Alliance podcast, where we dive deep into stories that inspire, educate, and empower. I am your host, Paula Blonski, president of the ARDS Alliance, and today I'm honored to welcome Michael Patrick, an ARDS survivor and the author of the powerful book, ICU. Michael's story speaks to the invisible struggle so many survivors face after leaving the ICU, the emotional trauma, the identity shifts, and the deep human need to be seen and understood. In this conversation, Michael shares his journey through ARDS, life after the ICU, and how writing became a path toward healing, connection, and advocacy. This is a conversation about survival and everything that comes after. So welcome, Michael.
Hi, Paula. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. So can you share a little about who you were before ARDS and what life looked like at that time?
Sure. Before all this, I was 33 years old. I was a full-time trial lawyer here in Central Florida. Husband, father of three. And at that time of my life, day to day was very fast-paced, as you can imagine. Our kids are spaced out, 5 years apart. So it was three different schools, three different carpool lines, three different drop-offs, three different pickups, full schedule of clients and cases and depositions and trial. Weekends were spent, annual passes at the theme parks and the zoo, and just keeping the kids as busy and occupied as possible. Otherwise, we're, a normal, healthy life with, nothing ever really, thankfully, had come my way before.
Right. That's amazing. You're very busy, right? So let's talk about your journey with ARDS and how did that begin?
Sure. So, November of 2024, just another normal day. I was driving my kids to school that morning. I had dropped off the girls. I was taking my son, and we pulled up to a red light. And while we were sitting there at the red light, a car came flying around the corner and slammed right into my driver's side.
Wow.
Thankfully, my son, my first thought is Aiden okay? Is Aiden okay? Thankfully my son was fine, but I took all the impact. I got the car home. My wife took me to the emergency room. MRIs had confirmed some herniations in my neck.
Okay.
They admitted me to the hospital a week later. I had a 2-level cervical fusion in my neck on November 15th.
Okay.
Surgery went fine, but right after surgery, when they attempted to extubate me and take that tube out, I started vomiting, profusely. I ended up aspirating. My lungs filled up. One of them ended up collapsing. I was immediately reintubated, placed on a ventilator, paralyzed with medication, put into a coma, treated for ARDS, spent 1 week in the ICU in a coma, followed by a second week in the ICU, kind of dealing with the aftermath of that before I was able to get discharged and come home.
Such a similar story to so many that we know, right? So what do you remember or not remember about your time in the ICU?
Yeah, so I remember the dream I was having during that first week. Right? Obviously, I don't remember what was going on around me because they had put me under. Um, Unfortunately, I think I remember everything, at least my perspective of everything, for that second week. It was really severe ICU delirium, very detailed, vivid auditory and visual hallucinations. I was seeing things that weren't there, talking to people that weren't there, just having a full kind of nightmarish experience. And we're 14 months out, and I can tell you every moment from waking up to the moment we were discharged.
Yeah. And so many people don't realize, right? They think you've been sedated and you're sleeping, right? So it's
Yeah,
very
they think you
important.
wake up and he woke up, he's great, he's fine. Let's just get him walking and get him out the door. And it was, if only that were the end of it.
Right, right. It's important to tell people that you're not just sleeping, right? So, how would you describe the impact ARDS had on you, both physically and emotionally?
I think it's ARDS has really been it ended up being kind of a defining moment for me and for my family. There's a very fixed point in time of the Michael Patrick before and the Michael Patrick today. And, physically, there's just overall weakness, exhaustion, diminished lung capacity, lower endurance, uh, a weakened immune system. Emotionally, there's a whole list of things that kind of go right along with it. There's hypervigilance, PTSD, anxiety, brain fog,
Hmm.
inability to concentrate or focus for too long. It's kind of completely upended what was a normal day-to-day life before.
Yeah,
And that it all, it lingers, and it kind of sticks with you.
right. Would you say that's the hardest part of survival that people don't usually talk about?
Yeah, I think the hardest part of the kind of survival part for us is that no one really talked about or prepared you for it doesn't end when you wake up. It
Right.
doesn't end when you come off the ventilator. It doesn't end when they hand you your discharge packet and wheel you out to your car. It's 14 months later, and it's still something that I have to wake up and choose to fight for every single day. My wife has to wake up and choose to fight for every single day. It's it it doesn't end. So that's really the hardest part. That it is. I think it's called survival because that's really what it is. It's every single day choosing to survive and kind of get through it.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. So, were there moments during your illness or recovery so far when you felt unseen or misunderstood?
Yeah, I mean that second week in the ICU when the delirium was at its highest, it was very isolating.
Mhm.
Seeing things, talking to people that weren't there, that feeling that no one really was believing me or taking me seriously. Nurses just dismissing it as confusion, side effects of medication. No one really. I didn't really feel seen or believed. It was actually had like a reverse effect that you would want in the ICU. Right?
Right.
Because I wasn't taken seriously, it was like it heightened the paranoia. It worsened some of the hallucinations. It made me feel like I was in danger. Like I was not going to get better there. And
Right.
it was terrible.
Ugh, that is very hard. So, there's a term that we talk about quite a bit called PICS, right? Post intensive care syndrome. Did you recognize that? Had you heard of that before? Did you know it had a name?
I I didn't know. No one, like I said, no one warned us.
Right.
We walked out of the hospital, and that was it. Um, so over the first couple months being home, my wife and I, we just kind of kept waiting. We waited for symptoms to go away. We waited for life to return back to normal, for us not to be woken up in the middle of the night with night sweats or terrors or, you know, that was very paralyzing because we just kind of sat and waited because no one told us that this was even a thing. So I would write it off. Oh, it's only been a couple weeks. I'll give it time. It's only been 2 months. Around the 6-month mark, I started to worry that something was wrong with me. That this wasn't normal. That this was kind of exclusive to what we were going through. That no one understood this. Why wasn't it getting better? So I started doing my own research. I started to try to just Google. What's wrong? How long is this going to last? What's going on? That's really when I started finding out about things like ARDS, PICS, how normal it was for the traumatic experience that I had gone through. For the statistics to be so high and for us to know so little about it was
Mhm.
just very shocking. So I recognized that there was something. I didn't have a name for it until I looked on my own.
Right. Right. that needs to change for sure. So how did ARDS or PICS change your sense of identity, purpose, or direction in life?
Yeah, I think all three, right?
Right.
b- before before this, I was I would joke with I was very much the I'm going to bring all the grocery bags into the house in one trip type of a person. I would load up both arms and I was carrying it all in. Cases of water on the shoulders. We weren't taking multiple trips. I was the family member at the bedside. I was the one helping with recovery, running around, doing errands, caring for my wife when she was delivering the kids, caring for my mom when she was going through chemo. You know, I've had to kind of grow to accept being the one who needs help, being the one who has limitations, being the one, who can't, may have to take a second trip or may have to ask his teenager for, a little extra help around the house or accept that I'm not at the bedside, I'm in the bed.
Right.
It's also kind of completely changed the trajectory of my life professionally too, right? I was very comfortable in the courtroom, in litigation. I was working at a very high volume firm with deadlines every day, different arguments, problems that needed to be solved, large caseloads, very fast pace. And for this first year, I tried really hard to kind of white knuckle it and
Right.
force normalcy back into my life. And more recently, I've kind of come to terms with the fact that I might not be able to do what I used to do. I might not be able to be able to physically, mentally, emotionally. I might not be able to do all of those things anymore. So I've kind of taken a step back from the courtroom, taken a step back from litigation, tried to find other ways, other avenues that I could still be helpful, still advocate for people that can't advocate for themselves. So it's ARDS, PICS, this whole experience has really been life changing.
For sure. So let's talk about some of the things you have done since then, right? So you wrote the book ICU. So let's talk a little bit about the book. So what inspired you to write ICU, and at what point in your recovery did writing become important to you?
So, there was one of the occupational therapists in the ICU towards the end that suggested helping get through the day to take like a notebook and start journaling, what was happening that day.
Mhm.
Um, I was in no kind of state to do it then, but I started writing when I got home. I thought it would be a good way to kind of get the nightmares out of my head onto the paper. If I got it out, maybe I'd be able to sleep.
Mhm.
And I wanted to write down every single moment I could remember. And when I started to do research, learn more about ARDS, learn more about PICS, and just kind of how many people went through similar experiences, it kind of grew for me into a way to shine some light on a really underrepresented group of survivors.
Right.
For fellow survivors, family members, medical providers, anyone even remotely connected to these kind of traumatic moments. It was a tool for my recovery that I kind of turned into a tool for others too.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the title ICU is powerful. What does that phrase mean to you as a survivor?
A couple of different things, right? It's obviously a play on the ICU, the intensive care unit that so many of us find ourselves in at the beginning of this. It was also a way for me to kind of acknowledge the delirium portion in the, ICU. Like there were things that I was seeing and experiencing that no one else was seeing. Also, it was important for me to kind of acknowledge, you know, anyone else who picks this up and reads it, you know, a survivor that's going through it, a family member, like you are seen too. Like I see you, I know what you're going through, I know what you've experienced. So kind of multifaceted there, but really just to let people know you're not alone and you are being seen.
I love that. Was there a particular moment or story that you knew had to be included in the book?
Really two that I kind of always think about, that if there was only two things I could have put in there, these are the two moments, because it shines the light the hardest on kind of two areas that I think really needed it. And the first would be, there's a whole chapter dedicated to the waiting room. And that's kind of really one of my most important parts, and I wasn't even there.
Right.
It's really important that, yes, I went through a horrific experience. I went through a complete tragedy, and I'm still fighting every day through it.
Right.
But it didn't just affect me. My wife was in the waiting room. My wife got the wave over from the surgeon. My wife got pulled into that room with the anesthesiologist. She had to sit at the bedside. She signed the forms. She watched every monitor beep, every ventilator hiss, every moment like a hawk. She journaled every bit of that treatment. She, tried to keep the kids' schedules as normal as possible, juggled everything on her shoulders. And, what she went through was almost as traumatic, if not more traumatic, than what I went through physically. And neither one of us really knew until we did our research that what she went through as the family member, as the caregiver, had a name,
Yeah.
had a whole community, had a whole group of people in that kind of PICS that PICS family category,
Right.
that knows exactly how she's feeling now, a year removed from it all. So there's a whole chapter dedicated to kind of the caregiver's perspective of things. And then the second part is, there's a moment in the ICU that I remember, my wife Miranda and I, we went through a lot. When I was ready, we went through a lot of the photos from that time, to kind of piece things together for me. And there's a photo of me. They had moved me from the bed to the chair. I was seated in the chair, and I've got blankets propping up, pillows propping up my arms, and I've got blankets underneath my feet so my feet didn't have to touch the ground. And I'm just staring off into the distance. And the monitor, and in the rear, in the background, my heart rate is spiking. No one's knowing what's going on. Why is his heart rate so high? And you know I felt everyone talking about me, talking around me, but Miranda was really the only one listening to why the heart rate was so high. You know, for me, it was because I was anxious, I was paranoid, I was fearful, I was trying so hard not to look out the window because I was seeing people. I felt threatened, I felt attacked, and it was a very fight or flight response. But Miranda was the only one really listening to that, the only one talking to me about that. The rest of the team there really just, they were talking about me like I wasn't really sitting there in the chair, as to how they could get my heart rate down and what could possibly be the cause of it.
Right.
So those two moments, I think, are the important ones for me.
That's awesome. So how was it emotionally to revisit what you went through and during your writing? Was it healing, painful, both?
I think both, and initially probably more painful. The first time I sat down, I was sitting on the couch upstairs, and I had a very physical response to it. My heart started racing, forehead started sweating. I had to really walk away from the computer for a couple hours. I had to set it down. It all was just kind of flooding back, and it was too real in the moment. But then after I wrote it all, it kind of made it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Once I published it, and I saw kind of the response from other people, and how it was resonating with others, that's when it started to really turn healing. Some good's coming out of it. Even one person got helped from it, then it almost made it all worth it.
Right. For sure. So why do you think it's so important for survivors to feel seen and believed? That's a tough one.
These moments for us are already so traumatic. They're already so life-changing.
Mhm,
For many of us, it's the worst thing we've ever experienced in our entire life in that moment. And you know, I think survivors need to feel seen. They need to feel believed because the feeling of isolation, feeling very alone on an island,
mhm,
that that can make the thought of recovery, the thought of survival, it seem impossible. If you feel like you're doing this on your own,
mhm.
if you feel like the smallest things in your mind are being overlooked or taken for granted or just kind of dismissed, that you lose any sense of hope in that it's going to either go away, get better, or start to change. So it's very important.
I agree. I agree. And even finding other survivors to talk to, right? That's got to be quite healing for
Yeah,
sure.
like I said, when I found there was an entire community out there, I just like it was very comforting to know.
Mhm,
Obviously, I feel terrible for every one of my fellow survivors that they even had to go through something,
right.
but it was very comforting to know that they were out there,
For
all
sure.
walks of life, all across the country, all around the world, different age groups, different illnesses, different reasons that kind of brought us to the community, that brought us to the ICU, that um, but such a similar experience, a similar story, a similar sense of feeling seen amongst each other. That's just it's astonishing. That part alone, like I've felt leagues better these last few months than the entire first year out of that hospital.
Yeah. That's amazing. So, what would you want healthcare providers to better understand about ARDS survivors and long term recovery?
I think the most important thing for providers is that, you know, especially the critical care ones,
Hmm.
they live in that ICU world, they live in that acute moment in time, and they are very good at that moment of critical care and in those immediate needs of triaging what's wrong and fixing it.
Hmm.
But you know I think it would be most beneficial for them to understand that our survival, our condition, our symptoms don't just end when we're handed a discharge packet, right?
Right.
That day we were being sent home. It felt like an assembly line. One by one, the different teams would come in. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, pulmonology, critical care, the hospitalist. They would go through their little checklists. They would ask the right questions, check the right numbers on the monitor or the labs, and we were sent on our way. The only thing we were really told was, hey, follow up with your primary care in a couple days.
Right.
So, we went the first 6 months waiting for symptoms to go away, the next 6 months doing research to find out what was wrong.
Yeah.
And I found an entire community of survivors, advocates, healthcare professionals that are working through the same thing I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I can't help but think now how much easier that first year could have been, how much better it could have been for Miranda and I as a couple, as a family, as parents, as survivors, had those resources been shared with us before we even left the hospital doors,
Right.
right? Had the critical care team did their job, they saved my life, but it doesn't end at discharge. Right? Had any of this information been made available, been pointed at, been included anywhere, I can't imagine the the weight that would have been lifted off of us both just over those first few months, let alone the first year.
Yeah. For sure. So, we've talked a little bit about healing. So, what does healing look like for you, and how has that definition changed over time?
It's constantly changing. I think it changes every day.
Yep.
It's definitely not linear. It's definitely not a state of constantly improving, right? Sounds very cliche, but there are good days and bad days. It's very much a roller coaster type analogy.
Hmm.
For us, it's a team of doctors, therapists, counselors. It's bedtime routines of medication, pills, inhalers, exercises, CPAP machines. It's finding a sense of community with other survivors and weekly support groups and telling our story and retelling our story and listening to others' stories to find that feeling that you're being seen, that there's nothing wrong with how you're feeling right now. And then mostly it's sitting in my living room with my wife after the kids are in bed and it's just us and it's quiet and reminding each other that we're still here and that the two of us together are going to get through it and not to let the hard days win. It's a motto that she shared with me, and I have it on the background of my phone to just not to let the hard days win.
Yeah,
That's what healing has been over these 14 months.
I love that. So if you could sit beside someone just waking up from ARDS today, what would you want them to know?
I would simply tell them that they're not alone, that I believe them, and I'm here to listen to anything and everything. No matter how scary it seems in these coming days or weeks, there are so many people and so many resources right beside you every step of the way, and that safety net does not leave you after the hospital. There is someone you can take with you from the hospital bed to your life in the future, because that's what I had in my wife. That's what I felt like I was missing from the ICU. So if I could go back and tell my past self that, or anyone just waking up, it would just be that they're not alone, and I believe what's going on.
For sure, that's important. So you've written ICU. What's next for you?
Um, I really think the next step for me is, Paula, you and I have talked about wanting to build the bridge,
Mhm.
right? I heard this poem when I was back in my college days, and it's called the Bridge Builder. It's about an old man who took this treacherous journey across a vast chasm, and uh, at the end of his journey, he makes it across, and instead of finishing his trip, he turns around and he starts laying down boards and he starts building a bridge to span the chasm. And a passerby comes through and says, "Old man, what are you doing? You did it. You survived. You crossed the chasm. You're never going to have to come back here again." And the old man says, I made it, but behind me there's a younger person coming who has to take this same path, and even though I survived, it may be treacherous to them. So I'm building the bridge for them. And I think that's what the next step really looks like for me, to be able to not just survive this myself, but to turn around and start building the bridge to kind of close that gap and make, you know, ICU to survival or ICU to recovery not seem like such a treacherous chasm that people have to walk through alone. So that's really what the next step is. I just finished the second part of the series. ICU is done and out. The next step, kind of fitting with what we've been talking about, the next step is I Hear You, and that's going to be coming soon. That really talks about building that bridge and that sense of community and a lot of the resources that are out there after the ICU. And from there, my hope is to keep advocating and keep building that bridge and help others do the same.
Yeah. And where can they get your books? Is that on Amazon?
Amazon, Kindle, Books A Million, uh, Apple, iTunes, Apple Books. The audiobook is available for those that kind of do better with listening than reading.
Yep.
It's available on Audible and can sync right up with your Kindle. Or there's paperback and hardcover for those that want to pick up a physical copy as well. So I encourage anyone, survivors, loved ones, caregivers, physicians, nurses, anyone who's ever been involved with some type of traumatic experience in the ICU to pick it up and kind of use it in their life moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great book. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being on our podcast today. I can't wait to see what the future holds. I know you're going to build lots of bridges. Hopefully, we'll build them together and just change the way it looks when you walk out of the ICU. So thank you so much for coming today.
Of course. Thank you, Paula, for having me.